Good afternoon, everyone. Please rise. Welcome here to the garage at the Cade Museum for our Rotary Club meeting of Gainesville today on this Tuesday, February 28th. Welcome to everyone. Just a couple housekeeping items, if you will. Please silence your cell phones. If it goes off during the meeting, that's a $5 fine, just to remind you of that. Visiting Rotarians and guests who are joining us virtually on Zoom, please register your participation by logging in on and letting Brenda know that you're on the Zoom today. And if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, please register your participation by sending us an email, info@rotarygainesville.org. We begin our meeting as we do each and every meeting with a song and pledge. And to lead us in both of those items, please welcome once again to the podium, Pete Enwall.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You should not judge a man until you have walked a mile in his shoes. But then you can judge him all you want because you're a mile away and you've got his shoes. We're going to sing God Bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Join me in pledging allegiance to our flag. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing now for our invocation, offered today via Zoom by Kevin Thorpe. Kevin.
May we pray. Lord, we are beyond grateful for this day, for each new privilege and opportunity that you provide. Thank you for what this month means, especially as we reflect on the contributions of African Americans on American soil. We're especially thankful for today's presenter, Dr. McCarty. We pray in advance that all of our words, our thoughts, and our deeds will be pleasing in your sight. It is for your sake and for your glory we pray. Amen.
Everyone, please remain standing. It's a special day. And we're going to have a special song for a very special man who plays our piano each and every week. It is Gordon Hubbell's 88th birthday today. So I invite Pete back up. Let's sing happy birthday to Gordon.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Gordon. Happy birthday to you, and many, many, many more.
Now, if you're visiting, please remain standing. And if you have a visitor, you're one of our members, please stand with your visitor today. Jason Shank has the wireless microphone. I thought for a minute he was going to beatbox with that.
Again, Bob Crane from the state of Iowa. My wife, Connie, is with me again today, and we'll be around a little bit more, and then it's going to be going back to Iowa.
Hi, I'm Mary Crane, a Rotarian, and this is my guest, Dr. Michelle Dunlap. I taught her son many years ago. I won't say how many, otherwise I'd be an antique around here. Anyhow, she's published many, many books. I would say about 5, is that correct? And written many articles and many essays, and just think the world of her and her son.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. I'm Colleen Keene. Joining us today is Yvette Robinson. She is starting the Xavier House Foster Home. It's a foster home for high potential youth. She's looking for a Rotary or a Rotary home in Gainesville. So please help me make Yvette feel welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Davis, and I'm the new president-elect for this coming year for the Keystone Heights Rotary Club. So very nice to join you guys. So sorry it took so long. But I just was here. If you want information, we are having our 75th anniversary coming up at the end of March. Good luck to you guys tomorrow, or actually in 2 days. We wish you guys great luck, and hopefully we'll have the same success. Thank you, guys.
Welcome to all of our visitors today. Now we have one announcement to be made by two members of our clubs. It's not the dynamic duo of Batman and Robin, the boy wonder, but it is John Thomas and Wilbur Holloway.
Well, thank you, fellow Rotarians, for all your help this past weekend at the Wild Game Feast site. Super excited that this Thursday is the 30th annual Wild Game Feast. The weather is looking good. We have plenty of volunteer opportunities for you, and we also have plenty of tickets. And remember, on Thursday, those tickets go to $100 a piece, so get them early and get them often. And with that, I'll give you the man.
Hey, y'all. We are the Dynamic Dunces. So I'm in charge of the raffle, and you guys know we've got 3 excellent charities. We're doing the PACE Center, we're doing Child Advocacy Center, and then the medical clinic for Grace Marketplace. Part of the 3-legged stool that raises money is the raffle, ticket sales, and sponsorships, and we're doing really well, but we could certainly use your help. The raffle this year is for round-trip airfare anywhere in the world within reason. Stay up to a 3-star hotel. Well, Bora Bora is kind of hard to get to. And the tickets are $10 a piece. They're 6 for $50 and 13 for $100. And I hate to threaten you, but I have had conversations with Jim Craig, and he is going to come out of his crypt and find you. So please buy your raffle tickets today. Today is the last day. Thanks.
Thank you, Wilbur. Now it's time to turn this meeting over to your president. Please join me in welcoming to the podium the Honorable Greg Young.
Thank you, sir. As honorable, now I feel honored. So, well, good afternoon, everyone, and great to see you all here today. This is maybe not known yet, but we are returning to the CADE next week. So, all right, well, there you go. We're going to be there starting next week. And so you'll get some reminder emails and such coming out just to make sure everybody finds that out, that even those that weren't here at the meeting today. And say it again. The setup crew, yeah, they'll be bringing it all over. And we're actually, after the meeting, we're taking all these tables and most of the chairs back out to Hatchet Creek for the Wild Game. So we've got a crew doing that. I want to thank everybody that's offered to help me with that. Also, I'd like to welcome Richard Allen. Richard, where are you? Could you stand up, please? Richard and his wife, Susan, just returned from Cambodia. They were there almost a month. They were working with the Sustainable Cambodia group where they go into the villages and where they've helped villagers with wells and with schools and with programs to help bring economic development to a country that was war-torn in the past there. And so we'll be getting an update later on that from Richard about his travels over there and the work they are doing, along with many other Rotary clubs here around the world, actually. Let's see. I want to thank the many club members who have participated in the prep work for the Wild Game Feast. I want to thank everyone who's bought tickets and who's going to buy tickets. And it could be family and friends, tickets to give to employees, however you want to do that. We want you to support this because it's a major fundraiser for all the clubs of Gainesville, but we play, because of our size, a major role in that. I also want to thank all our sponsors. Obviously, for the raffle, the Cousins, but we have many other great sponsors, some in the club, and it's outside the club. I see Marines here I haven't seen Marine in a while, but I want to thank Cox Cable for what they do, Cox Communication, excuse me, for what they do in the community. And then I've been here long enough to remember what it's called that, sorry. So anyway, again, I want to move on and thank all the people who have been working hard, but also John Thomas. As feast master, as we were talking about at the table here, the feast runs itself. It does not run itself. There's a lot of great people that help make it go, but it does take leadership. And John, you've done such a good job. I want to give him a hand right now. There he is. He's over there. Thank you. And you could see John after the meeting. If you haven't gotten your tickets yet, they're still selling tickets. So please do that. And Wilbur as well. Okay, let's see, where am I? Yes, and as Wilbur mentioned, the three charities, Pace Center for Girls, Child Advocacy Center, and Grace Pharmacy, those are the recipients. And our foundation vets those very thoroughly, the nominees, the applications that come into us. So we go through a matrix process to make sure that they're quality organizations doing work that we can support. So know that that money is being well spent on your behalf. Let's see, I think at this point now, actually, I want to just say one last thing. Heather, will you raise your hand again? Heather, she's a president-elect. She's going to be president next year of her club in Keystone. And so I'll be making an announcement about something they're going to be hosting down the road. But thank you for coming, Heather, today. I appreciate that. And at this point, I'd like to bring up Susan Crowley to introduce today's speaker.
Hello, everyone. He's falling apart. So today our speaker is Dr. Chris McCarty, Director of the UF Bureau of Economic and Business Research, or BEBR as we call it, and Associate Dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Dr. McCarty received an undergraduate degree in anthropology from West Virginia University and a doctorate in anthropology from the University of Florida. His research interests are in the area of social network analysis. Much of his work is on personal networks and how those can be used to predict health outcomes. He has worked on the adaptation of traditional network methods for identifying hard-to-count populations, such as the homeless and those who are HIV positive. He currently directs a network science program funded by the Clinical and Translational Science Institute at UF. Dr. McCarty also studies economic issues in Florida using data generated by BEBR's monthly survey. The Consumer Sentiment Index is produced from one of these surveys. Please welcome Dr. McCarty.
Is my talk going to show up on this screen? There we go. As promised. Thank you all for having me here. So I'm going to give a version of a talk. I gave this talk in December to the UF Eye Opener group. This is a shorter version of that talk. Some things have changed, but the overall message is about the same, I think. So the important thing is that I didn't do this by myself. Eleni Stillian is an intern at BEBR. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And Mark Gerson is my research coordinator. So they very much helped in the creation and the updating of these slides. Uh-oh. So, is it on? There it goes. So just a couple slides about BEBR. For those of you who don't know, BEBR is actually tied with Latin American Studies as the oldest center on campus. So we were established in 1929. So we've been around a while. I'm really trying to get to 2029, so we'll be 100. We have different programs. We are self-funded. So we do mostly grant and contract work. We have a survey center, which Susan mentioned. We have a population studies unit. We have had a contract with the state to do population estimates and projections since the 1970s. So we do the official estimates that everybody has to use. We produce those. We have an economic analysis unit that, among other things, did a racial disparities, racial equity study some number of years ago. We established a network analysis program. That's from my own research. So we do a lot on collaboration networks at the university. And then we still do secondary data services. So Some of you in the room may remember the Florida Statistical Abstract. So we aggregate a lot of data, we distribute it, and we still do that. And this is just talking about the internship program. So there's Eleni there on the lower left. That's Mark Gerson on the right. We're trying to have more and more interns because we think it's a good place for undergraduates to get an experience giving back and working for the state, doing something for the state, and getting faculty involved in that training. So that's a big part of our sort of new push. So today I'm going to talk a lot about inflation. Everybody's heard about it. You've experienced it. You experience it every time you go to Publix. Oh, okay. I was told that was going to happen. It threw me. Okay. So that's the topic. So what is inflation? It is just the rise in prices. The way we typically understand that being measured is with something called the Consumer Price Index. So this is actually produced by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, federal organization. So what do? They've identified a basket of goods, so you can kind of think of a shopping basket in the middle of Publix, and it's got some things in it. And those are items that the federal government tracks monthly, and they try not to change the things that are in the basket too often, because if you change them too often, you don't know whether the index is changing because you've changed the basket or because something else has changed. They do occasionally change things, so they added like cell phones at one point. And another important point is that about 40% of that basket is rent. And if you own a home or have a mortgage, that home or mortgage is actually turned into rent, and that goes in there. And rent is a big, big part of inflation. Unfortunately, it's a thing that lags. So because when people get rent on an apartment, you sign a lease every year, that thing kind of lags. So the effect of that in that inflation number is sometimes delayed. So you can see that CPI, the Consumer Price Index, has gone up. It does nothing but go up. But you can see if right at the end, towards 2020 onward, it's gone up at an increasing rate. A better way to see that is with this slide. So this is the year-over-year change in the CPI. This is one that you hear a lot about. And you can see that it has tended to hover around 2%. 2% is actually the target. That's what we want. We don't want inflation to be zero. We really don't want inflation to be negative, because that causes other problems. So most central banks in the world target right around 2%. You can see that we sort of did that after the Great Recession. It went down, and it was persistently down. It was under 2%, and it was a real head scratcher as to why that was. And then there was COVID. You can see it went down during COVID, and then it's shot up very, very dramatically. And you can see here towards the end, it's come down some, and that is due to what the Fed is doing, which I'm going to talk a good bit about. The Fed actually uses something called the PCE. It's a different measure of inflation with a different basket of goods, but the story is pretty much the same. Why do we care about inflation? I have one slide on why we care. There are many, many things that can happen when inflation gets high. One of them is hyperinflation. We're not anywhere near that, but this is an illustration of that. Venezuela is very much in a circumstance of hyperinflation. Because the government misused the printing of money, money loses its value. People don't understand the value of money. And so that is a chicken, and those are all the bolivars that it took to buy that chicken. That's a circumstance that Venezuela is in, and other weird things can happen when you get out of control inflation. So what's the answer to inflation? The answer is the Fed, which stands for the Federal Reserve System. A short lesson on the Federal Reserve. Everybody hears it, you know about it. I think people get angry about it. Why does the Fed want to destroy jobs? In fact, the Fed does want to destroy jobs right now. So what is the Fed? It's a system that was created in 1913. There had been a series of runs on banks. And so what's a run on a bank? I actually had a slide in December from It's a Wonderful Life, right? There's a famous scene where everybody wants their money back. And, you know, George says, I don't have your money. It's not here. It's all invested in you, right? The money's not actually here. There had been a series of those. So the Congress created the Federal Reserve System with Federal Reserve governors that oversee, among other things, the interest rate that banks charge each other for an overnight loan. So if one bank is experiencing a run, they can get cash from another bank, and we don't have runs on banks. So the Fed has a dual mandate. There's two things that they're supposed to do. They're supposed to make sure that we have maximal employment and that we have stable prices. Those are the only things they're supposed to do. They're actually not supposed to look at the stock market. They should not care whether the stock market is inflated or not inflated. There's lots of things they shouldn't care about. They only care about those two things, and they have to trade those two things off. And we're in a circumstance right now with inflation where one of the only ways to control it is to actually make unemployment higher, right? Part of the reason that we have inflation is wage inflation, and they need to create a circumstance where we don't have two jobs for every person that's applying. So that's part of what the Fed is doing. It's important to know that the Fed is not a government organization. It does not report to the president. It does not report to Congress. They do testify in front of Congress. The president does appoint Fed governors, but they have a very long term, 14 years, right? And the Fed chairman, I believe it says a 4-year term. So the president does have the ability to fire a Fed governor. It has never happened. And the minute it does happen, it will be a problem because it's viewed that there is a firewall between the way the central bank operates and the government. There's too many temptations from politicians on either side of the aisle to tell people what to do. And a good example of that is Liz Truss. You all may remember Liz Truss is famously had the shortest tenure as Prime Minister of England. She got into a fracas with the British Central Bank, the Central Bank of England, and she lost. So central banks have a purpose, and their purpose is to keep the economy steady. So they have two ways. They have many ways they do that. The main one is controlling the federal funds rate. That's that interest rate that we've talked about. And then there's some other ways. I won't go through this slide, but at the lower right, these are many of the mechanisms the Fed has. One of the things that the Fed does is it actually controls the supply, and it controls it by, they can increase the money supply by buying treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. And when they do that, they add money to their balance sheet. So this is the Fed's balance sheet. This is effectively the money that the Fed has created. If you look at that's 2008. We were in a big pickle with that Great Recession. One problem with that recession was liquidity. So they created more liquidity by creating more money. They doubled the amount of money in the economy by buying treasuries, buying mortgage-backed securities, and they kept on buying them. And then you can see when we get to 2020, they didn't know what was going to happen. They were being proactive. They doubled it again. So we got to a situation where the money supply went from about $1 trillion to $9 trillion, and we're trying to get away from that position. That is a big part of why inflation is here, right? The Fed, in order to intervene in the Great Recession and in COVID and that very short recession, created a lot of money, and Congress created mechanisms to put that money out in people's pockets. So we all have more money than we had pre-COVID, and we're still spending that money down. This shows you a graph of, so those gray bars are recessions, and the thickness of the bar is the length of the recession. If you looked in 2007, 2009, that was a relatively long recession. You can see that the COVID recession was very short because we shut down and then we injected all this money, we opened back up, so things started again. Those peaks, those are the federal funds rate that the Fed controls, and then those three areas that are highlighted are what are called soft landings. So what's a soft landing? That's when the Fed raises interest rates and we don't end up with a lot of unemployment, we don't end up in a recession. The track record of the Fed in soft landings is not very good. So my bet is that there's going to be a recession, and I'm going to have a couple more graphs on that. That is the big debate, right? People say, is there going to be a recession? The answer to that question is yes, there will always be a recession. The two questions are, when will the recession be and how deep will it be? And my guess would be this year, and probably a moderate recession. Okay, this is the yield curve. So that dotted line is a normal yield curve. It's the relationship between the interest that you get on a short-term bond versus a long-term bond. And under normal circumstances, you should get more interest when you park your money for longer, right? The inverted yield curve is when things are wacky. People are not confident in the long-term economy, and so they're not willing to park their money for a long time. And this is just to show you where we are. So I believe that is February, I think that was 2019. I can't read it from here. Is it? Okay. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is where we are as of this February. That yield curve is completely inverted now. And one of the Federal Reserve banks does a indicator of recessions that has almost always predicted a recession. So when the yield curve inverts, within 12 months of it inverting, we have a recession. So that indicator would indicate we're going to have a recession. Okay, let me talk about some Florida indicators now in this context. As Susan mentioned, we collect data from about 500 Floridians every month. We do it by survey, believe it or not. And we do a replication of what the University of Michigan does nationally. So it's called the Consumer Sentiment Index. This is a measure of people's mood and their propensity for wanting to spend money. The Fed has been very interested in this lately because there's some questions in it about people's perception of the price of big ticket items. And the Fed is very concerned about people perceiving that inflation is out of whack. That's a big part of how inflation continues, is when the people just out there don't believe that it's licked. So this is a thing that they follow. You can see that the lowest we ever got was in June of 2008. So it was the Great Recession. We actually got pretty close to that through in COVID, but we're starting to come out, but we're still at this very, very low level. This is showing you sectors of the economy, effectively, what is the Florida economy made up of? So the part on the left, that bar, is the percentage that it made up of the economy in 2021. And then the red one is the growth. And interestingly, trade, transportation, utilities is a very big part. Financial activities is a big part and a growing part. One bright spot is that construction has actually kind of come back a bit. So on this graph, this shows you construction jobs, which is something that I would talk about and tracked a lot during the Great Recession. You can see that there on the left, that was the number of construction jobs we had pre-Great Recession, and then we paid for it, right? So there were too many houses out there. Construction just fell off a cliff. And so we lost all those jobs. We've been steadily gaining them. We're still not where we were pre-Great Recession. You can actually see a couple of bumps there. You can see Irma, and you can see the COVID effects. But generally, we have been increasing. Somebody's raising their hand, not for me. Okay, a big part of the Florida economy is tourism. It's not the biggest part, but it is an important part. And so this is Florida visitors. You can see that generally you do have some sort of a recession effect to visitors. So when there's a big recession, people's pocketbooks are impacted. They're not coming from other states or other countries to visit Florida. So they halt that. There was a big effect, obviously, from COVID when there was a shutdown. You can see that, but we recovered from that. And so this last year was actually quite a good year. And therefore, it was a very good year for Florida revenue. Florida revenue, I took this slide out for this audience, but Florida general revenue is actually expected to fall very, very much next year by like 16%. And that's due to the fact that a lot of this growth is due to the money that people had in their pockets, and they're spending through it, and in some cases have already spent through it. So there is an expectation that some of this sort of post-COVID activity is going to slow, and the money that made it so people could do it is gone. This is showing you population growth. It is still the case in Florida that this is the biggest driver of the economy, people moving here. So when somebody moves here, they buy a house, they build a house, they spend a lot of money on things. It's a big driver of the economy. Our estimates are that we have never gone negative in Florida. During the Great Recession, it came close, but it didn't. So it's never gone negative, and it continues to grow. This is showing you natural increase, which is births minus deaths. So it's part of the equation of calculating population. And an interesting thing is in 2020, we had a first where deaths outpaced births. Some of that was due to COVID. Some of that is due to the inevitable effects of low fertility, right? We, as a state, are an older state. And the U.S., like many developed countries, has a fertility problem where we're not producing enough people to replace ourselves. There you can see this is a population pyramid. The top one is the year 2000, and I believe the bottom one is 2021. And so the way to read that is it's showing you the age groups as they sort of move up through the system. So one important point, one thing that's happening now that we knew was going to happen is there's a lot of baby boomers that are near retirement, and they're here and they're not coming back because they're retiring. And because of that, that affects labor force participation. So that's a big deal. Labor force participation is the proportion of people that are working or looking for work out of those that could. And it has been, in Florida, it's been lower than the US for quite some time, and it continues to be and probably always will be. So you can see during COVID, labor force participation went down, and it has struggled to come back, and it is still not back to pre-COVID levels. A couple more slides. This is, we tend to track housing. The interest rates are obviously impacting housing, right? Because when the Fed raises interest rates, it makes a mortgage more expensive. That's going to factor into whether somebody feels like they can buy a house. So this shows you the price of the median price of single family homes. I liked this one because most homes that are bought and sold are existing homes. So someone want to focus on new homes, but it's really the bulk of it is existing homes. You can see that trend line. You can very clearly see the bubble that we experienced prior to the Great Recession. You can see the price we paid for that, right? There were too many houses. We discovered there were too many houses. And so the prices fell. Prices have come back. They're above trend. This isn't a bubble like the Great Recession. We're not going to have a fall in prices like the Great Recession, but housing prices are falling, right? As they should, because they're a little bit overpriced right now. This is my last slide. Mike, the question is, what's the Fed going to do on March 22nd? So March 22nd is the next time that the governors meet, and they can set the federal funds rate. Up until a few weeks ago, I think the expectation had been that they would probably do another quarter point. But there are some indicators, that PCE indicator that I mentioned came in uncomfortably high. It was up instead of down the last time. The jobs report came in uncomfortably strong. So some in the media, journalists say, it's great that we created 500,000 jobs instead of 186,000 jobs. That's not great because what that means is there's more jobs out there. We're bidding wages up, particularly in the service sector, and that's pushing inflation up. So that is an indicator that the Fed's they haven't done their work, right? They need to raise interest rates to the point where there aren't so many jobs that are created or available. That sounds counterintuitive, but that's what they have to do. They have to balance inflation with employment. Those are the only two things that they have. And so it's very, very difficult for them to raise interest rates and get inflation under control and not do something about jobs. So I think that's it. you might not want to applaud. It's a very negative. I tend to do negative talks, so. Any
Ed Ellett, could you comment a little bit about when there's deflation? What happens? Deflation?
Yeah, well, deflation is one of those circumstances where, yeah, it's all about people's perception of money, right? And so deflation is a circumstance where you don't have much growth and where people are sort of waiting around to buy things, right? So it's the reverse, right? The price of things can start going down uncomfortably so. So there is a level of inflation that you actually want, I think, right, to keep a healthy amount, and that amount that has been targeted is 2%. There are a lot of questions now about whether that's the right amount and whether the Fed is actually going to be able to get down to 2%. But nobody wants a circumstance where there's deflation. So you want there to be a circumstance where everybody expects that prices are going to go up a little bit, and everybody buys things and uses services in that context.
China's economy has been shut down for a while because of COVID, and also because of the effort of the Chinese government to sort of constrain capitalism. But to what extent, when it opens back up, which it's doing now, to what extent will that contribute to inflation here?
Well, it could. So that's what a lot of people have talked about, the effect of China opening up. It's going to create demand. That's viewed that could be viewed as a buoy in a sense, because it creates demand for our goods to the extent that we're able to have those transactions with the Chinese. But it could actually affect inflation in the sense that all of a sudden there's people with money and they have money, right? And they create demand, global demand. So that can work in both ways. I don't know, and your comment about controlling capitalism. The Chinese have a desperate problem. I don't know how many of you know about the mortgage, the mortgage situation. They have underwritten the construction of a lot of apartments and houses, and it's unstable, right? So the national government has intervened, and so they have some problems. Yeah.
Excuse me, Doug Wilcox. My interpretation of what you said was that the government over monetized the entire country, or created more money.
The Fed did.
The Fed,
which is not the government.
Okay. Well, my understanding was with the stimulus with the COVID.
Right. The Fed created the money, and then the government created programs to put the money in people's pockets.
Okay. So that created a lot of the inflation.
I think so, yes.
I agree with you.
Right.
So where did all the workers go? That's my next question. And when are they coming back?
Well, I think that population pyramid is part of it. So that's a very good point. There's a lot of discussion. There's like a couple million people that didn't come back after COVID. And the question is, where did they? That's why there's almost 2 jobs for every person that's applying for them. If there were more people in the labor force, then we wouldn't have that wage inflation. And I think a lot of them were people who were baby boomers who were near retirement or at retirement and decided that's what they're going to do. So that's an answer. They just retired. It was always going to happen, but it has aligned, I think, with COVID.
So with an involvement in social services and low-income housing and employment opportunities for that end of the community, it seems like there's a construct that is able to be manipulated that is either maintaining groups of people staying in the unemployment, non-educated level of our society, and if there isn't an opportunity to look at those interrelationships between the Fed and the government and communities' abilities to lift those individuals with education. And I'm wondering if that's a topic that comes in through your department. How, with all the knowledge that we have and compassion for others, are we not able to help more?
Yeah, that's a good point. The Fed has the levers that it has. So the Fed, I don't think, operates at that level. I don't think they actually have the levers in order to target that group. Congress does, right? And so there are things that Congress can do that we all know what those are. Some variant of, taking tax money and programs to help people and educate people. At the other end is, levying more taxes on the rich. I mean, that's a thing you can do. What your comment made me think of is an observation that I feel like I've had. One thing that I think has occurred due to COVID is that our economy is very dependent on a certain set of people who don't end up going to college and end up getting high-end jobs, right? We depend on a certain set of people who, operate in lower paying jobs. And I think that contract has rightfully so been broken, right? So for example, why doesn't this restaurant have enough staff? Because it was a really crappy job before COVID and people realized that. And so if we really want that service, we're going to have to pay more for that service. And so I think that's a big part of what needs to happen. There simply needs to be a redistribution. I will sound like a socialist, although I'm really not. But there just needs to be some recognition that somebody that's doing this job for you deserves to be paid a decent wage. Well, I don't know if I can say that. But
yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
Years ago, I took your class, so it was good to be in.
Oh,
yeah.
Which one was that? The survey one, or
it's a survey one?
Yeah, I think I remember you. Yeah,
years ago. So
it was really good information back then. It still is.
So my two questions, because you told me to, is relating to the debate of no workers or workers after COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So talking to some of my friends who have small businesses, they said it's hard to get workers.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you hear the report, everybody seem to be their own boss and they create some job and they are their own boss of business. So how do you capture that in the data to reflect? Because some people are saying that I don't want to report to a boss. I want to be a boss of my own, and they create their own businesses, which doesn't reflect that they don't have a job. So how do you capture that? And what is your take on student loan debate? Because that's
okay.
Because if you say the Fed set up the interest rate, I'm a peace person. I want everybody to live in peace. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So the debate is, where do you start? Somebody who paid student loan, I don't know, 50 years ago to somebody who paid student loan today. How do you reconcile that? Is it possible for the Fed to lower the rate, the student rate
on student loans?
On student loan?
No.
Okay. Then what's your take?
Because well, I'll deal with that one first. They don't have that mechanism. They don't control car loans. They don't control mortgages. They control the federal funds rate, and then that permeates its way through the economy. Although I do believe with the students' loans, they've been very slow to react. Certainly on the way down, they were slow to react, right? I think that they didn't go down as quickly as the federal funds rate when it went down. Yeah, I mean, when I was a graduate student, I had a student loan. I paid it, but I realized that there's been some predatory lending. So, and I think that it's a real problem that a lot of people are stuck in this cycle where they really just can't get ahead. They can't buy a house because they have student loans. I understand that some people will say, hey, I paid mine off. Why does somebody else get theirs paid? On the other hand, it's really a national problem. So I guess if I were asked, I'm on the side of it's $20,000, I think, is the amount that would be forgiven. And I'm for that. But I'm not really in Congress, so that doesn't really matter. On your first question, I don't know about, I actually don't know about, there is data on new businesses. I'm not aware of any notion that there's been a lot of single person businesses created since COVID. That's not something I've looked into or that I'm aware of. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the first half. You had the people who were creating their own businesses, and then I thought where you were going to go was automation and AI taking over a bunch of jobs and replacing everybody, but that wasn't where you were going with that.
I don't know what's the government minimum wage now, 15 or something like that.
Right.
So instead of people working for someone, an online job is everywhere.
Oh, well, you know, I have a 36-year-old who just left a job because he wanted all his friends have remote jobs, and he wants a remote job, and you know, I didn't understand that, so I won't. But I think that's a big thing. I think a lot of people feel like they ought to be able to work remotely. We struggle with it at the university, right? And I think we've landed in a pretty reasonable place where we allow people to have a certain number of days remote. But I'm not answering your question at all. Now I'm talking about university remote working policies, but I don't know the other side of the equation, the business that have been created.
Chris, in terms of the employment situation, I'm right over here.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
With the ebb of vocational training and education and the mantra for a stretch there that everyone had to go to college, has that affected the employment situation? The lack of vocational training and education for a certain period of time, that we're seeing a resurgence of that now?
I don't know if there was a lack. You perceived that there was a lack of opportunities for vocational education? It ebbed?
I think it had ebbed, yes.
It may have. I don't know about that. I don't know if I feel like that we don't call them community colleges now, do we? Right. There's another term for them. But you know, they still have offer those programs. I do feel like maybe there's too much. I can't believe I'm going to say this. There's too much focus perhaps on a 4-year degree, right? Some people, you know, do need to have training in, you know, vocation, and we should pay people what they deserve for those. Those are valuable skills and valuable jobs, and we need to pay people living wage for those. So I didn't answer your question either. I'm not doing very well at the end here.
Okay, guys, we've got one more quick question so we can tie up on time. And Jacob, one of your questions that kind of got answered along the way, Wilbur is a good example of someone that kind of wasn't counted for, right? Independent business owner. There you go. That's the Wilbur.
I think he is counted. I think he is counted. He would be counted as employed. Yeah. By the current population survey. Pardon me?
We count him as a half a person.
Okay.
We love you, Wilbur. We love you. I was curious if you could talk a little bit about mortgage rates and where you think they're headed, looking at a historic perspective, you know, the rates going up, and are the mortgages related to business loans, single family homes, and those kind of things, and where you see that trend going?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, initially they were just going up, right? So they do respond to these hikes in the federal funds rate. It does seem that there's a point at which the mortgage rates diverge from what's happening with the federal funds rate. So, but you know, mortgage rates are, you know, quite high now for at least one, if not two generations. They've never seen this. They certainly don't know double-digit mortgage rates like people had in the 80s. So I think the Fed is going to continue to raise rates, and even when they're done raising them, they're going to keep them there, right? So I listened to Bloomberg a lot, and I was listening to an interview this morning, and you know, sort of the conclusion is whatever happens with wherever we end, they're probably going to keep it here for a long time because the rates that we have now are really historically more normal, right? A 2 or 3% mortgage rate is historically really unusual and not something that's sustainable. So I certainly don't think that we're going to get back down there. I don't think that we'll get to a circumstance where the Fed's going to have to raise rates. I think on my last slide, I think 5.5% is where people are sort of thinking now that they'll stop. There's a bit of a cat and mouse game going on between the Federal Reserve and the market. I say that the Fed doesn't respond to the market, but it seems like they're upset that the market is trying to plan in their rate hikes and actually now look forward to rate cuts. And the Fed doesn't want that to happen. So my guess is that mortgage rates are going to continue to rise a little bit, but I think the Fed will probably stop around 5.5%. That's my guess, much as it's worth.
Oh, sure.
Okay. I'm sweating a lot.
It's warm in here.
It is, yeah.
Chris, thank you for coming today and speaking with us and giving us your insights on the federal as well as our state economic outlook. And in appreciation of that, I would like to present you with this certificate designating that we're going to give the Cade Museum a donation to their scholarship fund for underserved and underprivileged children in your honor. So thank you, Chris.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, very good.
All right.
Yes, sir. Wow, that was great. Very insightful talk. I think those are why we like to come to Rotary on Tuesdays, to learn more about our world. And thank you, Chris. Well, I hope you can join us next week at the Cade Museum proper when Deborah Newell will be giving us, she's the chair of our Rotary Youth Exchange group. She will be heading that presentation up for us next week, so I hope you can join us then. And also before then, I hope to see almost everybody, if not everybody, out there at the Wild Game Feast site this Thursday. It's not too late to get tickets, as I mentioned. John's over there. Also, if you still want to sign up to help out the night of, you still have that opportunity as well. So please do that. And let's see where I'm going with this. I'm going to the quote of the day. So not that you touched on this at all in either way, but one of the things that people don't, this is a quote, it's not my personal comment. One of the things that people don't realize is that the natural beauties, those recreational areas, they have an economic development impact for our state as well. Ed Rendell. And with that, the lucky reading safari number, last four digits, 749, and we are adjourned.